Molly, I think it's great that we are doing this podcast today, that we can hear your stories and relate to what you've been going through so that we can learn from these funny experiences that can be really informative.
Yay Networks.
A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter and they really help us. We're talking about gut health or gastrointestinal issues in this week's episode of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. And before you're like, wait a second, I don't know if I'm ready for this yet. This is something that affects so many people on so many different levels. For some, it might be just sort of a mild inconvenience. For others, it can be debilitating. It can change our life patterns. It can be life-changing, life-threatening in some cases. And so if this is something that you are dealing with personally or somebody that you're close with is dealing with, then this is the episode for you. So I'll be sharing a lot from a personal perspective, also a lot as a dietitian and from that professional side. And I'm also joined by Courtney Brooks. Courtney Brooks is a registered dietitian with Ochsner Health, and she works in the Department of Gastroenterology. She deals with, a variety of health issues, but she specializes in digestive disorders. So we'll be talking about IBS or irritable bowel syndrome. We'll be talking about Crohn's disease, a little bit about things like celiac disease. We'll cover SIBO and what this is, how, why it's so important and how it can be such an important indicator. And then really our gut health in general, that gut microbiome that we read so much about, hear so much about, and it's really connected to just so much of our whole body well-being. So welcome, Courtney.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your background first.
Sure. I have been a dietitian now for about 5 years. Prior to that, I actually have a degree in veterinary medicine and did practice as a small animal veterinarian, but I have ended up in the field of dietetics because it is my true love and inspiration. And I have been working within Ochsner for 3 years, most recently in their gastroenterology department as a GI dietitian specialist.
I'm fascinated by that. I am. I love the fact, I'm like, it's incredible to me that you have such a passion for nutrition that you went through the whole pathway and worked for years as a veterinarian and then switched it to caring for people versus animals. I'm still wondering though, if I can have you back on and we can talk about pet nutrition.
That would be fun. I would love that.
Maybe we can put that old hat on and have you back for that. So to me, that's just, I love both of those. So in addition to being a veterinarian by education, you tell us you also went to University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill.
I did go to Chapel Hill for my Master's of Public Health in Nutrition, and I have a Bachelor of Science in Biology.
And working with humans versus pets, and especially working in the GI space, it's something that I can imagine. And y'all, when we say GI, just so I think most people know, but if not, sometimes I get a look when I say that. GI, gastrointestinal. Sometimes we'll say gut health, sometimes gastrointestinal. We'll kind of use those interchangeably. So if you hear me saying GI health, that's what we're talking about. I would imagine as you're working with patients in this space, there's a lot of emotions that are around it for people.
Absolutely. And that was one of the common trends I've seen between working with people with their pets as well as now working just with people is the emotional side of caring for people who are not feeling well or people who are caring for pets who are not feeling well. So I have worked a lot with individuals on managing emotions around their diseases.
And when we are talking about these GI issues, there can be so much embarrassment around it. There's a lot of shame around it. I've shared a little bit on this podcast before, but get ready, y'all. Kind of gave Courtney a little bit of a sneak peek at some of the things. It's something that has been for me personally like a lifelong struggle. And I have kind of found over the years that I just acknowledge it. I talk openly about it. I'll laugh about it. And I think people are maybe sometimes horrified. It may embarrass them, but it's, you either deal with it and you acknowledge it, or you're going to stay home and not want to go anywhere because of fear of, what a bathroom situation may be or something like that. So just to kind of like, backstory for our listeners, if you're interested, but it's something that, I'm 48 now. And so I don't remember it so much when I was younger, like little, like elementary school, but starting in high school, like that freshman year, sophomore year, it was, I started having, I didn't know it. I didn't have a diagnosis of it, but I was having symptoms of IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. And there would be a level of urgency that I would have to go to the bathroom like right away. And in fact, like I had my freshman algebra teacher. He was amazing. Like he was such just a caring person. And my stepmom also happened to be the secretary at our high school. And I remember like one day she said, that he had come to her and he had expressed concern to her that I was bulimic because the class that we had, that algebra class, lunch fell in the middle of it. So we'd go to class. It was like a 90-minute class. You'd break for lunch and come back. And I always had to go to the bathroom immediately after I ate. And sometimes you would be in a test. And like in high school, if you're taking a test, you do not ask to go to the bathroom.
Right.
I mean, like, but he would see the like, the intensity that I was asking of this. And I was a good student. And, I think he trusted there wasn't anything like that going on, cheating or anything. But he saw this, intensity of going to the bathroom right after lunch. He suspected bulimia, but what it really was those beginning signs of IBS.
Wow.
And so I remember being a little horrified, but also touched that he cared enough to kind of bring it to my stepmom's attention. And then also like, and they're all talking about it like in the teacher's lounge.
Oh no.
But also like around that same time, I started doing like, I joined the cross country team. And so our longer routes would be like a 6-mile route. And I went to school at Baton Rouge High in Baton Rouge. And it was kind of, the route that we would run would be around the LSU lakes, which is these beautiful areas. And so you were kind of like, you'd leave the high school, you'd run through neighborhood streets, and then you get to the lakes where there's these big, beautiful homes surround the LSU lakes. And I would have to go to the bathroom. And now I feel like there's more construction and there's portalettes, and I have no qualms about a portalette either these days. But at the time, not. And there wasn't businesses, there wasn't places you could, because you were only in the neighborhood and stuff. So I would knock on people's doors.
Have to do what you got to do.
And so here I am, like a junior in high school, knocking on the door. And everyone I encountered was so kind.
Oh, that was that's nice to hear.
Oh my gosh. They would be like, come back here, whether it was like young or old, man or woman, like come back here. This is like, it's not safe to just knock on any door, honey, come back here if you need to. So I knew I had, maybe 6 or 8 houses along this like 6-mile route that I knew they were gracious. And then they'd be like, we're baking brownies. Do you want some? Or we've got lasagna. I'm good. Thank you.
You were adopted. Yeah.
But like just screeching in. And so for years, it's sort of been like, it's just happened. And then, okay, there's more. So in college, I start running longer. I'm, training for marathons. There was one where I literally, like this time there was a gas station around. It actually was the gas station right around the corner from our house, but it's now under new ownership. So I know not the same people. I'm running through and I'm zigzagging through the neighborhood, whatever it is, like I'm in a 14-mile run or whatever. And I would try to come back home if I had to go to the bathroom, because running combined with IBS, I mean, it's a recipe, yes, to have to go. So I had to go and I was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to make it to my house. I'll go to this gas station. It's probably, half a mile from here, a mile from here. I go screeching into the gas station. I'm like tearing into the door. And I knew where the bathroom was, of course, because people who have anything like this, if you're listening, you know where the restroom is in any given place. If you've ever set foot in a place, like, like what your options are. So I knew where the restroom was. So I go tearing through, and the person working behind the counter starts shouting, "You can't go in there."
No.
And I said, but I have to. And I'm like in the middle, and there's like boxes, like they'd received a delivery. And so they're unpacking stuff, and they're behind the counter. And then there's all these boxes that had been delivered. And I'm on the other side of the boxes, closer to the bathroom. I was like, but I have to go. And they said, no, like you can't. And what they were saying was there's no lights in there. Apparently the electricity was out in the bathroom or something, which made no difference to me.
No.
So I stopped for a second and I'm like, what do I do? And I was like, in my head, I was like, I'm going. So I take off back to the bathroom. The attendant runs from behind the counter, but the boxes, fortunately,
Oh my gosh.
slow this person down. Then they come to the door. I like run and I lock the door. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I'm like, oh God, and there's no lights in here. That's what they were saying. Oh my God, there's no lights. Then they start shouting, I'm going to call the cops on you.
Oh my goodness.
Courtney, it was horrifying.
Right.
And so I was like, in the moment, completely terrorized. I was like, if the
Wow.
police come right now, what do I say?
Right.
It took me a long time to think any of those stories were funny. And
Sure.
then, because I had that shame and I was so embarrassed. And then I realized, who cares? I mean,
Mhm.
other people, and especially as I would share with clients over the years, so many people could relate. And it's like, there's not, I mean, if you can see the humor in it, okay. And someone may say, Molly, I don't think any of that's funny. I just think it's awkward. And you're making me uncomfortable. But trying to at least not let it stop me from wanting to go do the things.
Absolutely. I think it's always surprising to me how long people have dealt with some of these
Right.
GI symptoms and what they've had to go through.
Right.
And to be able to speak to someone who is compassionate and not, feel embarrassed or, terrified about their previous experiences can, I think, be the start of a life-changing experience. I think that finally they can try to start to relate what they've been going through with the disease state that they're dealing with, and finally see like the light at the end of the tunnel, some help that's coming, and hopefully that gives them a better perspective on the things that they've had to deal with since that time.
And when it is something like that, or someone dealing with something like IBS, and there's the urgency to feel like you have to go to the bathroom right then, and sometimes it's your head, it's all in it's mostly in your mind, because it's kind of that Pavlovian response. If you are in a space without a bathroom, you start to panic.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start to feel like, oh my gosh, I have to go to the bathroom right now, because there isn't one. But as soon as you're in a situation where there is a bathroom, okay, like I don't have to go. So kind of, and I know that people who are if you have close friends or family, or this is you, like, exactly what I'm talking about,
Mm-hmm.
And so it is, you sort of have to know what your plan is. And if we've ever had times that it might be like a long bus trip without a bathroom or something like that, I'll wake up sometimes at like really early hours, or I may go for a walk, or I may do other things to try to feel to where I'll be comfortable in that space.
Mm.
And unfortunately, at some points I've said, well, I'm not going to eat much before we go do that. I'll wait and I'll eat after, whenever I know that I'll have access to the bathroom. And that's not often, but there are those times that you might be on a 2-hour bus without a bathroom access or
Right.
something like that. If you're traveling, or like a tour or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, I wish everything was equipped. That's one. But sometimes there's things like that. The last story I'll tell you, because there's a lot. But this one was maybe the most horrifying. I had gone to visit my friend Amy, and she lived in California at the time. And she lived just outside of Santa Barbara in like a small town. And Santa Barbara Airport's really tiny. It's kind of like Fantasy Island Airport. It's really small. And so I'm leaving to come home, and we had like a connection in Utah. And so I'm flying by myself. And as I'm in that airport, they make an announcement on the overhead speaker that said, we're sorry for any inconvenience, but the flight departing out right now doesn't have a working lavatory. And so I go to the attendant at the desk, and I said, I have to reschedule my flight.
Sure.
And so I ended up, going through, and then I had to go back and, reschedule all this. And they said, wait a second, that was an error. It's working. So I said, okay. So I get on the plane. I'm sit there, and I sit next to this older lady, let's say her, like, Mary. And I'm just chatting with her, visiting. And as we're taxiing down the runway, as the plane is about to lift off, they come on the overhead announcement and they say, we're sorry for any inconvenience, but there's no working lavatory on this plane.
Gosh.
Sheer panic. And this lady was so sweet to me. And she goes through the same thing.
Oh, wow.
And so she had already planned all this other stuff and taken medications and things like this. And she literally like talked me down from the ledge. And when I landed in Utah, I called my husband and I called my friend Amy, who I just left. And I was like laughing like wildly. I was like, oh, we're going to play this. Oh my God. Yes, it was the adrenaline. And they were both horrified. They were like, that's not funny at all. Like, this is like inhumane to have you fly for 3 hours with that fear.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
my goodness.
So all of it is to say, this is something that is, that's like we said, it can be humorous. I think a lot of times if someone has IBS, sometimes it can be that sense of urgency. Sometimes people have constipation or bloating or other things. IBS is one, and we'll talk more about it in a bit, but I would say that's a little bit, it's more inconvenient, would you say, versus life-threatening?
Absolutely. Yes.
The other that we'll talk more about, and I shared with you all of my experiences more with the IBS, but the other is Crohn's. And so we'll talk about that. And that's can be far more serious. We've had close friends who've lost loved ones because of Crohn's. And so this is, when we talk about gastrointestinal disorders, they range from the inconvenient, the embarrassing, to the very dangerous, I think.
Absolutely.
Let's take a minute to share about Caraway Home, partner for this week's episode. Caraway Home's non-toxic kitchenware collections make cooking and baking a piece of cake. We love our Caraway cookware. It's our go-to for everything from seared salmon to creamy spinach to our Eat Fit candied cashews. The pans heat up quickly, they cook evenly, and they're incredibly easy to clean. And with our exclusive discount, you can now save on the full suite of Caraway products, including their internet-famous non-toxic cookware set, also Caraway's food storage, tea kettle, and mini cookware. Visit carawayhome.com/fueled to take advantage of this limited time offer for 10% off your next purchase. This deal is exclusively for our listeners, so visit carawayhome.com/fueled or use promo code FUELED at checkout. Caraway, non-toxic cookware made modern. So where do we want to start? I guess we could talk maybe a little bit more about maybe we'll talk IBS first, since we kind of went into that, and then Crohn's. My take on it, and tell me your thoughts, and we can talk about like for each of these like diagnosis treatment. My take on something like IBS or irritable bowel syndrome is it's a catch-all. Like it's not really a diagnosis that's very specific.
I agree. It's, often the doctors in the gastroenterology department are ruling out life-threatening diseases first. And when those turn up negative, irritable bowel syndrome comes up as a possibility to explain or help explain the symptoms that someone's dealing with. And the approach to IBS is also kind of a individualized approach. There is no one path to treatment through dietary approaches, especially. So it is a complicated disease to both diagnose and to treat. And we deal with a lot of people who have been through a lot of traumatic experiences.
I just looked at our time marker. I think I shared bowel stories for 15 minutes. But we'll see.
At least they were very interesting. But, they just want to feel normal or comfortable living in the world where there isn't, always a convenient place to run and run to the bathroom. So my job as the GI dietitian is to try to start helping them pinpoint triggering foods that, lead to these symptoms. So it is definitely a process of trial and error.
So the first would be they're testing for and hopefully eliminating conditions like Crohn's disease, which we'll share more about in a bit, or celiac disease.
Yep.
Because those are some that could be causing pain, discomfort, maybe some of the symptoms of this. And so if those things, ulcerative colitis, if these things come up negative, then it's okay. It's IBS with constipation, or it's IBS with a sense of urgency or bloating or whatever it is. And then from there, talk to us about the different approaches that you would take with someone.
Sure. So initially in our first consult, I'm asking, have they been able to identify foods that they are most sensitive to, or patterns in some of the symptoms that they're experiencing. If they are already avoiding things like lactose, we might review how they're doing with that. Are they struggling to find alternatives? But usually the main approach that we use is something called a low FODMAPs eating plan, which is not nutritionally complete. So it is only a temporary eating plan. Usually we try to explain what the low FODMAPs diet approach is. I tell them to try to start with that for at least 2 weeks and up to 6 weeks, and to see if their GI symptoms resolve. It is a restrictive diet.
Tell us what FODMAP stands for.
Sure. It's fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. Real fancy terms there.
Which is why we say FODMAPs. And essentially that means?
Those are, FODMAPs are carbohydrates that are more difficult for our GI system to digest and tend to travel down into our intestines, where the bacteria that naturally live in our, especially in our colon, will chew on those carbohydrates and produce gases that can cause discomfort and bloating.
So it could be fruits, it could be vegetables, it could be whole grains, nuts, seeds.
Yep. There are categories. There are high FODMAP foods in all of those categories.
So those things are, and kind of just to restate it, those are, they're fiber-rich carbohydrates that can basically provide that fiber or that food for the bacteria that's hanging out in our guts they're feeding on it basically. And a lot of that produces these symptoms that we're talking about. It can produce the gas or diarrhea, that urgency. So those are some of the first approaches.
Absolutely. Right. And then,
but when you're avoiding a lot of those things, like you said, it's also pulling a lot of nutrition from someone.
It is. It's a lot of favorite foods, go on hold for that time. And it can definitely lead to some issues with nutritional deficiencies, vitamins, and micronutrients as well. So we do definitely talk about the trial period, which is important right after the low FODMAPs eating plan, to start adding foods back that hopefully will be tolerated.
Right.
And we also talk a lot about having a food and symptoms journal during that time, especially to try to pinpoint which foods are most triggering.
It's tremendous doing that, and it's tedious for someone to do, but it's invaluable. So, I will encourage anyone who's listening, if it's you, and like we said, if it's close friends, family that are dealing with this, keeping a food log. Do you say a week or to include a weekend? Like, how long do you usually ask?
Well, in the beginning, definitely I tried to do 2 normal weekdays or work days, and then at least one weekend day. And then I talked to them about that trial period, definitely to try to pinpoint which specific FODMAPs groups are causing the GI symptoms that they're experiencing.
With food logs, a lot of times people use like an app, or they'll use something like MyFitnessPal or something. I've always been more of a fan, when we're talking about a food and symptom log, of doing it more old school, pen and paper.
Absolutely.
And then, because otherwise you're looking through their food log on, their app or their phone or whatever. And if they're using that, you're able to see the time they ate and what they ate, but it's not overlaid with their symptoms. Whereas if it's on a, like, say, notebook, they can write what time they ate and they can intersperse symptoms all through it. So you as a dietitian are able to see that overlay. So to me, that's the most valuable.
I completely agree. You have to link the food to the symptoms. Right. And if it's not recorded right after the meal, then it's hard to know which food was the triggering substance.
In some cases, though, there can be a delay, which can make it even kind of problematic. Like sometimes it might be within an hour or two. Like the example I was giving in high school, right after lunch, I was like dashing to the bathroom. But in other cases, someone may have something and it could be delayed several hours or even to the next day.
Absolutely. Yeah. We try to look for patterns. So it might be something that happens immediately, and we can try and take that food away and see if symptoms resolve. Those are the more easy ones to pinpoint. But you're right. Sometimes symptoms don't appear for a few hours or even after another meal completely. So we really try to look at the patterns of the diet overall. So this is, the food and symptoms log is invaluable in that sense.
We also have, and I've mentioned it on this podcast before, our Ochsner Fitness Center team of dietitians offers the food sensitivity testing. And you were saying that's not something that your department is offering yet, but you'll often interpret those results. So someone comes to a team like ours or outside and is doing a food sensitivity test, And our dietitians, they love it because it helps to narrow that elimination diet, and it gives a little bit more targeted direction, and that can often be helpful. Not always, but often.
I completely agree. That is definitely the case. We start with usually trying to cut back or eliminate the foods that have been identified on those food sensitivity tests as a place to see if we can get resolution of GI symptoms before launching into cutting out all the FODMAPs groups. And oftentimes we do see good results just starting with those sensitivity tests.
When I first, when I was kind of exploring and trying to kind of find answers for myself on things, of course, working really closely with my gastroenterologist, we did several colonoscopies and looking to make sure, is there anything structurally going on, and there wasn't. And the answer was, it's functionally. And so one of the things that you may hear your gastroenterologist or a dietitian like Courtney mentioned is like, for me, it was like transit time. So how long that food takes to basically go through, so that transit time for someone with IBS that has that sense of urgency may have a very fast transit time. So you eat foods and it's like very quickly going through your system. And so what can you do to kind of slow it down would be one. And that's why, the way that I always kind of think, and another word is like peristalsis. This is like your, like kind of that, the motion of your intestines, like basically working and wringing out the foods and digesting it, And so if you think about if someone has that and your body is like really pushing those foods through really fast, sometimes those high fiber foods that Courtney was talking about, or the foods high in those FODMAPs, can like really speed up that transit time. And so that was something that I had noticed, one, that caused it. But when I did the food sensitivity, so I noticed that, wow, high fiber foods, if I eat a lot of them, worsen the symptoms. So one thing that I started doing was some of the fresh pressed vegetable juice. So it has a lot of the greens and the beets and all those other things that I'm getting more in the drink of that, maybe 8 ounces, then I would be able to eat that many cups of that produce because of the fiber. And so something like that fresh juicing may not be for everybody, but for me, that's sort of a way to get the nutrients, but without getting all of that fiber. But when I did the food sensitivity test, soy showed high. And I realized that products, and this was sort of like back in the day when there would be like a lot of soy protein and different protein bars or all types of things. Like now pea protein is very fortunately common, because pea protein is also very low in reaction for gut. So, but at the time soy was more common. And when that came back as one of my highly reactive foods and I started avoiding products with soy, that's not something I would have guessed.
Wow.
You know?
Exactly.
And so it was something that I was like, okay, I could see that those fiber rich fruits and vegetables was making, worsening it, but I wouldn't have thought that. And so, all of these are just different tools to kind of know and learn, and working with a dietitian like Courtney. And I'll include also information about Courtney and the GI department there, and like how to schedule. But depending on where you are in the country or what insurance covers, like keeping that food log, finding someone that you can work with that can help you basically be your own detective with it.
Yeah, I think people really appreciate having somebody to help them reflect so that they can, weed out all the information that they're recording. Sometimes it takes an objective eye.
And it's one of those that, something like a food log can be, someone may say, well, they feel like, there's judgment. There's no judgment there. It's
absolutely not.
Literally just helping you piece together this puzzle of how your body is being affected by these different foods. Talking about that with like the transit time, one of the things that was really interesting, and this was way back years ago, I mean, probably like 20 years ago when I was first, or even more, when I was first diagnosed with it, maybe even 30 years ago, which is crazy to say. But I remember my physician then, this might have even been like, it was when I was in Baton Rouge or had just moved to New Orleans, not anybody that I'm currently working with, but they had wanted to give me a prescription. And I remember they referred to it as a binding agent to take it for life. And I was, or basically, and I was like, I'm going to take a binding agent forever. And so I met with, he's an MD, and he has a holistic approach. He's no longer in practice, and I won't say his name. This is years ago, but I thought, let me see what I can do that's maybe like a holistic approach. And so to kind of slow down that transit time, he was like, let me prescribe you opium.
Oh, wow.
No, this was probably early 2000s before, like, I think we were in our house before Katrina. So it was before 2000, 5.
Okay.
And so early 2000s. And I remember like my mom had come in town. And so she's visiting Brad and I, and we're like driving out to the middle of nowhere to this pharmacy.
Oh, no.
Like, they have like, you go like behind the door and like
Oh,
knock on a door, and literally it was a vial, like a bottle with a squeeze dropper. And I think whatever number of drops I was supposed to put in X amount of ounces of water before I ran. The idea of it was that slowed that peristalsis, slowed that GI transit
there
time.
is some logic to that.
And then you jog on like your opiates.
Right.
And I'm such a nerd on those things. Like I was very, very cautious, and I used it a few times and probably half the amount that was supposed to be, and never amount that you would ever have felt anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wasn't really comfortable with it. And I remember Brad kept saying, I'm just not comfortable with this opium in our kitchen
Sounds
cabinet.
a little sketchy.
So that didn't last long. But y'all, this is what we're saying. Like when you have these things, you will keep searching and searching. And so some of the things that Courtney and I are talking might be the approach to use versus drops of opium.
Yes.
Okay. So anything like on IBS that is other big takeaways, like the FODMAPs approach. And if someone has the ability to meet with a dietitian, talk with your primary care doctor, see if you can get a referral to a dietitian. You can pay out of pocket. Insurance can cover it, different scenarios there, depending on someone's like kind of individual coverage. So we don't want to speak to that, but that's going to also vary again by coverage and all. But knowing that, Courtney's available, specializing in the GI space, our dietitians at Ochsner Fitness Center also cover this a lot, not to the degree that Courtney does, but so if you're doing self-pay or insurance covers it, that may kind of determine which avenue you go. But knowing that there's support there and working with a dietitian, working with a gastroenterologist, ruling out those other conditions. Let's take a minute to share about Nutrafol, one of our sponsors for this week's episode. You've heard me say it before, when it comes to skin and hair care, I am a huge rules follower and I'm very consistent. I follow the specific recommendations of my dermatologist. So when I'd first learned about Nutrafol, I reached out to ask her about it. She said not only does she recommend it to her patients, she also uses it herself. So here's the deal. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement. It's clinically shown to improve thicker, fuller, healthier hair from the inside out. It targets the 5 root causes of thinning: stress, hormones, environment, nutrition, and metabolism. So it is possible to grow thicker, healthier hair and support our show by going to Nutrafol.com, entering promo code FUELED to save $10 off your first month's subscription. It's only available to U.S. customers for a limited time. Plus, free shipping on every order. That's $10 off at Nutrafol.com. That's spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code FUELED. Let's talk a little bit about Crohn's, because that is one where it's really serious.
It is. Yeah. We do see a lot of Crohn's patients in the GI department at Ochsner. And it can be scary about how much weight loss and protein malnutrition we see when somebody's in an active flare.
Explain how that differs from something like IBS.
So Crohn's disease definitely has more inflammation and irritation and lesions when they're looking in a colonoscopy than they might see with somebody with a IBS.
When we said earlier that they did a colonoscopy, plural, on me, and I said there was nothing structurally wrong with it, that was also what I meant, y'all. As I was saying that, they were looking, and that was part of the process of ruling out something like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. They're not seeing the lesions. They're not seeing physical damage there.
Right. But with Crohn's, there definitely is physical damage to either the small intestinal or large intestines.
And lots of pain.
Yes, absolutely.
And then with that, there's also impaired absorption, nutrient absorption. So you mentioned like protein malnutrition.
Yeah. There's often some of the same signs with IBS, but then things like bleeding is common, significant weight loss because of the malabsorption. And we work with Crohn's disease individuals to try to get those active flares under control by limiting irritating foods that have a lot of fiber. It's usually a low residue, low fiber diet for until their symptoms resolve.
That was the catalyst actually for this entire podcast episode, was a conversation that I was having with someone about that. And she was like, Molly, I have Crohn's, but the diet for it is not nutritious. How can I make it better?
Yes.
So because it's very low fiber, like you said.
Absolutely.
And so what are some ways that someone could still eat to manage something like Crohn's? I would imagine it's almost still like we talked about FODMAPs, but things like vegetables, fruits, nuts, whole grains. Is that largely what someone would want to limit with Crohn's?
So really the whole grains is the only thing that you need to, well, it is one of the biggest groups that we limit. So we are talking about eating things like refined white flour products and sticking with low fiber grain choices. But fruits and vegetables are limited, but still allowed. It's just really the consistency. They need to be peeled and skinned and cooked well so that they're nice and soft versus avoiding them completely. So
something like a citrus segment, like the membrane on that would not be good. But
correct.
some people you could actually peel the membrane off of if you wanted
orange.
citrus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And buying, juices that are pulp free or straining them. Cooking your carrots down so they're nice and soft, or having the insides of mashed potatoes or sweet potatoes. So there is some nutrition. It's not what we would recommend for a general healthy diet, but in this case, the management of the Crohn's symptoms takes precedence.
The question on flours that this person had was, and it makes sense to me, but I haven't worked in this space enough to know, but it would seem like, because she does a lot of baking, and it was really bothersome to her that, because of her Crohn's, she's using things like all-purpose flour when she's really trying to be healthier. Would something like almond flour, which, is naturally gluten-free, but it's more nutrient-rich, higher in the healthy fats, higher protein, doesn't have the refined starch that all-purpose flour has, would something like that still work or be acceptable for? And I know it's not going to be across the board because it is so individual.
Right. I think the flour form of it would be. We recommend generally not having whole nuts just because they are hard to digest. But yes, the ground up almond flour might be a nice nutritious alternative to the white flour.
And there's almond meal, and then there's blanched like almond flour, to where basically the skins are out of there entirely. And not only does it reduce having the skins and the flour, it also gives a prettier baked final product because you don't have the little flecks of dark in there. So I think those are some things that if you're thinking, well, gosh, I can't do whole grains, I can't do all this fiber, but talking with your dietitian, talking with your physician, hey, could I try almond flour? Or coconut flour is a little bit drier. Almond flour, but those two, almond flour holds a lot of moisture. Coconut flour is a little drier. Sometimes recipes may do 50-50 on those, or a blend of both. But that's something to look into to, kind of meet in the middle.
Absolutely.
On trying to eat for that kind of protective approach, but also still being mindful. Yeah.
Yes. And I do always try to tell people that this very low fiber diet is only temporary. I do see a lot of Crohn's disease patients that have been in remission for a while that say that they still avoid eating raw fruits and vegetables.
Because they're afraid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They don't want those symptoms to return. So I think education, telling them, I try to make a strong point of saying this is a temporary eating plan until you are in remission. And then we want to start adding sources of fiber back into your diet so that you have a healthy gut overall.
I think some people I know, kind of we talked about earlier about the shame or, the embarrassment on those things. And I think especially in something like Crohn's too, as much as people are comfortable in sharing it, I think it can help people around you understand, and I'm thinking about, we had a big project that we worked on, and I worked on it really closely. I don't think he would care if I shared it, but I'm not going to because I haven't asked him his permission. But it's someone who I just adore. And I knew he had has Crohn's, and I'm glad I did, because as we worked on this project, there was times that we were spending the entire day and long days together, and I would see a physical change in him. And, because when he was going through a period where he was having a flare up, and when he would be in pain, everything changed.
Wow.
And sometimes the people around us didn't know that he
Mhm.
had Crohn's. And I would, I would be like, I would want him to share, because it was
Sure.
like, otherwise it's an unexplained shift in this person that's been one way. And then all of a sudden, wait, what's wrong? Why is he
Right.
acting like this? Or is he just in a bad mood? And it's not that.
Not at all.
And
Yeah.
I think that more that, if someone is comfortable sharing, it can help people understand too. And there's that fine line, because some people are like, I don't want anyone to know because I don't want people to feel sorry for me or feel like they have to cater to me. But on the flip side, when people know, it can help them understand what maybe some of those emotional shifts may be
Mhm.
from the outside.
I completely agree. It's a disease state, and sometimes people don't want to share that vulnerability with others, but it's important for people to understand that sometimes symptoms are, out of the control of that person.
So when people are going through tests that we said earlier and kind of ruling things out to find that diagnosis of IBS, Crohn's is one, celiac disease is another.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's two different ways, I guess talk to us about how someone would get the diagnosis of celiac.
So the gold standard of celiac is through a biopsy of the colon, and I think often there's some tests that they run that diagnose celiac disease. I guess there might be gluten sensitivity, not necessarily full blown celiac disease, where a person might notice that they have GI symptoms when they eat gluten, which is a protein found in certain grains such as wheat.
So with celiac, that's one where if someone does have full blown celiac, I mean, even something for some people, even having it in flour in the air can trigger a flare up. But for others who, like Courtney said, have a sensitivity, they may be able to have very small amounts of gluten. Or like, interestingly, things like sourdough bread have already like a natural fermentation that's happened from the yeast that's just collected in the air, which sounds strange, but there's like yeast all around us in the air that's, basically what's fermenting and helping to produce the dough for sourdough bread. And that yeast in there and that fermentation is actually digesting the gluten to some degree for us. So some people may have a better time. It's easier for them to digest something like sourdough bread than traditional sliced bread packaged from the grocery store with like that fast acting yeast. A big misconception is that people will think, if they go to Europe, for example, they can deal well with the bread there, but why can't I have the bread here? And people will think that the wheat here is genetically modified, and it's not. Y'all, commercially available wheat is not genetically modified in the United States. It's illegal to sell it, to purchase it. So the bread that you're eating, even just kind of the lower quality breads on the sliced breads in the grocery store, they're not genetically modified, but they are using fast acting yeast, and those sourdough or kind of like old school bakery breads are using that longer fermentation time, which is digesting the gluten for us. Now, again, someone with full blown celiac, probably not still going to be able to have those, but someone who has simply that sensitivity or intolerance, that might be a solution.
Absolutely.
Anything else that we want to talk about on like IBS, Crohn's, celiac? The biggest thing on all of these is that it is so individual.
It is. It's hard to tell somebody immediately what they can and cannot eat. It really is a working relationship with the patient to try to find out their tolerance level, what foods that are definitely not recommended, but which ones they really miss and would be able to tolerate in small amounts. I always say that portion matters and exposure to the amounts matter. Sometimes in the case of celiac disease, any gluten should be avoided, but with gluten sensitivity or intolerance, it could be that they could.
A little bit.
Right, exactly. A little bit might not be so damaging.
And all of it kind of ties back to what we talked about in the beginning, that gut microbiome. And so when we talk about gastrointestinal health, or we talk about gut health, that gut microbiome, it's all of the, the probiotics, all of the microbes living in our GI tract. And, years ago, people just thought the bacteria in our bellies were linked to if we had diarrhea or not. Someone say, oh, if you're taking antibiotics, it's going to kill off that good bacteria. You need to eat yogurt. And that was kind of like what we knew. But now we realize there's just so much about gut microbiome the connection to our mental well-being, anxiety, inflammation, our cholesterol levels. Like there's so much that our gut microbiome is tied to. I'll link to some past podcasts I did on that with Dr. Timothy Spector, specifically about gut microbiome and approach in that of like how to do everything possible to enhance health of gut microbiome. There's one test that we want to talk about for a minute, and it's called SIBO. I've covered it also on this podcast, but I think it's worth, when we talked about gut microbiome, I covered it there. I think it's worth bringing up again, though, as we're talking about GI issues. SIBO stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And SIBO is a really good indicator of your, basically, well, let's break it down. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth means your small intestine has bacteria in it hanging out and overgrowing your small intestinal space. Those bacteria are not supposed to be there. They're supposed to typically be further down in your large intestine. They're not supposed to be up higher in your small intestine where they are, but they're there and they're overpopulating it. And so when we eat foods that normally would make their way through the small intestine all the way to the large intestine where they're supposed to be digested, instead they're getting broken down a lot higher up in our digestive tract. And so that alone, that SIBO, that imbalance of bacteria in our guts, that small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, that is linked to so many things. And so talking about kind of my journey of exploration on this, my GI doctor had said, hey, let's check for SIBO. And we had done it years ago. It came back inconclusive. And I had a lot of personal things happening, like my mom had been in the hospital and stuff like that. And I just didn't revisit it. And then I've shared before on this podcast that I've had issues with gallbladder attacks. And you always feel like you're like 90 when you're like, gallbladder's acting up. like if there's something that like, Indian food or like Thai food, Brad will be like, I don't know about the gallbladder. Do you think you can have it? I'm like, I feel like I'm officially 90. But, as that was happening, I also was seeing that my cholesterol was going up. And so, Courtney, this is one of those things that was like, I don't know. I think just hearing it and like tucking it away, if it helps anybody. But I was like, this is very strange that the gallbladder attacks were starting, and gallstones tend to be a cholesterol-based stone for our listeners. And at the same time, my LDL, or what we refer to as, quote, bad cholesterol, was going up and significantly. And I'm like, this is strange. So I start looking into what could be kind of the connection here. And SIBO is one of the things. So when you have SIBO, it can lead to basically your body's not breaking cholesterol down properly. And I'm like, well, that would explain maybe why that LDL cholesterol is going up and why these gallstones, these cholesterol-based gallstones are forming. And so, my gastroenterologist said, let's do that test again. And it's a breath test. And it was about 2 years ago, summer of 2021. And you do this breath test and it takes about 2.5 hours. You can do it at your house. And it turned out that I tested positive, very high levels of SIBO.
Gosh.
And the treatment for it is an antibiotic called rifaximin. And I took the rifaximin for a 14-day cycle. We retested it, and my SIBO levels went from a 28 to 0. And anything over 12 is considered significant. They went from 28 to 0. And also for the next 20 months, I had very, very minimal gallbladder attacks. And it had been so bad that I was throwing up from it. It was debilitating. It was waking me up every night. It was just, I didn't want to have my gallbladder removed, but I was to the point where I can't live like this, And so getting that SIBO under control with that rifaximin, almost 2 years, it really stayed to maybe, I had an attack maybe once a month, maybe twice a month, but it would be a very mild one, something that would just come up, pass, not nearly as debilitating. And now, for about the past 6 weeks, they've really revved up. Had one last night. I was like on the ground, like rocking back and forth. And, my husband now says, wake me up if it gets really bad. He's kind of like, it's so common. He's like, what level was it? We have that conversation now. And so I had asked my physician, hey, can we do that SIBO test again? He said, why don't we just do the antibiotic? I'm like, I kind of want to see though.
Yeah.
Because also cholesterol had dropped during that 2-year window. It dropped down into, about 30 points. And now it's back up. So I suspect that the SIBO is back up. We'll see. I'll be doing that breath test tomorrow morning. So to be continued on that. And so for me, that was a game changer on that. And so what was interesting though, you said, I hardly ever see SIBO tested at Ochsner.
Yeah. Exactly. So we were talking about whether I see a lot of SIBO patients, and I said I hadn't really seen any yet. And Molly thinks that it's because the testing just really isn't done at Ochsner right now. But I did actually see my first patient this today with SIBO, and we tried to, we talked about trying to manage her symptoms, but she did get the rifaximin and said that it was extremely helpful for her.
It's also extremely expensive. And so here's kind of what I learned in that process about 2 years ago. And so it was interesting because we did the SIBO test, it came back high, and my gastroenterologist was, the rifaximin is the antibiotic that really targets specifically that bacterial overgrowth exclusively. So it's not just killing off all your gut bacteria. It's targeting specifically that the bacterial overgrowth that's happening, that's proliferating like in that small intestine. So he goes to prescribe the rifaximin, and he's really, like, I adore my gastroenterologist because he is really open to saying, okay, you don't want to have your gallbladder removed, because that's his first recommendation, and I'm like, I don't like, so he's open to saying, let's figure out what else can we do. And he was like, wow, the fact that rifaximin gave almost 2 years of relief, this is great. Let's prescribe it again. But what happened that first time he goes to prescribe it 2 years ago is it got declined by the insurance. And it said that I had to have either hepatic encephalopathy, which is basically like loss of brain function because your liver can't clear toxins from your blood, or I had to have IBS, which we have, with diarrhea, or like kind of that sense of urgency we talked about, which I have. And then with that, if you have the IBS, you have to also be 18 or older. The medication has to be prescribed by a gastroenterologist. Yes and yes. But the third must meet this criteria is that I had to have tried a prescription like antidepressant already.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, but I don't want to take an antidepressant for this. And so it said, and I get the letter of decline from the insurance company. Your doctor told us that you have IBS, but that you have not tried antidepressants. And so this is why your request is denied. So I was like,
sounds like the insurance company's trying to be the doctor.
Right.
Wow.
I was steaming. And so we were able to get coverage, and, a roundabout, way that is not how it needs to be in the healthcare system, unfortunately. And so Molly's philosophy is that this is why SIBO, not just at Ochsner, but in general, in most traditional gastroenterologist office or physicians, something like SIBO, what the physicians have shared with me is, why are we going to test for SIBO when we can't do anything to treat it? And I get
Makes
it.
sense. Yeah.
They're like, so, for the, all the hoops that we had to jump through in order for me to have it covered, most people, it's just, they're not going to do that. It's not going to be possible. And so I get it, of like, why would they? But still, to our listeners, I would say, if you're listening to all of this and you're like, you know what, something like knowing that SIBO and knowing if you have it is really key to starting to heal in a lot of these spaces that we talked about. So if someone receives that diagnosis of IBS, which we said is really kind of a catch-all, and maybe if you have that SIBO, that bacterial overgrowth, and maybe that 14-day course of rifaximin antibiotic can help give you some relief, then it may be worth pressing for this.
I agree.
And so it's, while it's something that, and it was like, I can't remember, I want to say it was $3,000.
Wow.
It was it may have been 1,000, or maybe we had a coupon that would have gotten it to 1,000. I mean, it was really high. And so, there's things that might be like, you would say a medication's expensive, and then there's like really expensive,
Right.
And so, but that's something that, again, for our listeners, I would continue to press for that. And I think the more that we ask for it, even if you get the eye roll, it's not an invasive test. And like I said, you can do it at home. You breathe into these little vials, basically. You drink a little solution, a lactulose solution, and then you're basically breathing into these little vials like every 15 minutes. And so it's testing like how your body's responding to this type of a solution. And then, so my physician placed the order for it. I received the kit. I'll do it at home. I'll put it in the mail. The lab will process it, and he'll get the results. And so if you're doing that, like, okay, at the very least, you'll know if you have it or not. And then you can decide how worth it is it for me to like press to have coverage
for
something like that medication. Okay, so as we keep saying, over and over, it's so individual, and what was going to work really well for one person may not move the needle at all for another. And it's truly kind of taking the initiative, for each of our listeners. Again, if it's you, if it's your friends, your family, like, and supporting them in this, but really trying to do that detective work. In terms of supplements, talk to me about digestive enzymes.
So I actually recommend those relatively frequently for individuals that are having trouble digesting things like lactose or legumes or beans. I think it can be very helpful, and also keeping their diets expanded and
Right.
open, because, we love our red beans down here in New Orleans. And for me to tell somebody that, beans are hard to digest because of the fiber content, they kind of look really sad. So sometimes Beano
Right.
can really help, and especially allow them to keep some of those favorite meals in moderation. So digestive enzymes they're usually relatively inexpensive and can be very helpful for liberalizing that diet and keeping it, expanded.
It's one of those things that is so benign.
Mm-hmm.
And so why not
Yes.
try it, And when we talk about digestive enzymes, there's kind of a full spectrum of them. There's digestive enzymes that can be like a combination of different enzymes. And you may see words like lipase or amylase, or I say it pancreatin.
Mhm.
Pancreatin is how I've said it, though, but I actually hardly ever say it out loud. And those the lipase helps to break down fats, the amylase helps to break down starches. And so you can take a supplement that has multiple types of digestive enzymes. And again, nothing wrong with that. And you would take it with meals.
Mm-hmm.
Before, after, does it matter?
I usually recommend before.
Okay. And then what's interesting is that some of the digestive enzymes, if someone takes it on an empty stomach, it can actually help with inflammation
Mm-hmm.
or joint health. And so, there's sort of, when you look at what are we going to, why are we taking it and what are we looking to benefit from it, we would take it with meals. And so you can do, again, a supplement store or someplace like that. It'll say digestive enzymes, and they'll have kind of a mix often of those. And then something like Beano.
Mm-hmm.
So Courtney and I just looked at each other and said, which enzyme is in that? And I was like, is it amylase, which breaks down starch? But it's actually alpha
galactosidase.
And so that's breaking down the starch and the fibers and the beans. And then you mentioned earlier, if someone's drinking milk, lactase.
Yeah. Lactase enzyme can be very helpful for lactose intolerance.
And so something like Lactaid milk already has that enzyme added to it, which is basically breaking down the lactose for you, or you can take it in capsule form.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you can do a mixed digestive enzyme blend. You could do something like Beano, specifically, as the name indicates, for beans, but other types of starches.
Sure, lentils generally, but yeah, the legumes group.
And then Lactaid or lactase enzyme for something that has lactose in it, the milk sugar naturally. Something like yogurt, the probiotics in there have actually already digested a good portion of the lactose for us. And so someone who's lactose intolerant can often have yogurt or something like a Greek yogurt without having side effects. And they're like, how's this possible? But it's because it's already partially broken down, sort of like we talked about sourdough bread with the gluten being digested. Think of that as the same thing with yogurt and the lactose. And then hard cheeses like a Parmigiano Reggiano, very, very low lactose. So there's different options there. Anything else in the digestive enzyme space for people to know about?
We do deal with pancreatic insufficiency sometimes, and Creon medication, which is one of those mixtures of enzymes, most specifically that are made from the pancreas. I know individuals do have to deal with cost it can be cost prohibitive because they have to take it with every single meal and every time they eat. But it is a very important medication that will help somebody with pancreatic insufficiency digest their food and absorb the nutrients from it.
And like you said, give that variety back and the foods that are also nourishing to our bodies. So if someone is looking to get more information, if they want to schedule with you, if they want more information about meeting with a dietitian.
Yeah. So I see individuals who have been referred from the gastroenterologist with an Ochsner. So you do have to be a patient within the gastroenterology department. But when you are in that department, I am a courtesy service. So
That's so great.
the doctors within the department have decided that nutrition is a very important component of gastrointestinal health and in treating the diseases that they see. So I will see all patients that are referred for free.
Which is amazing.
Yes.
It's an amazing service.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of to restate what Courtney said, if you're local, if you're in the Louisiana area or an area where there's an Ochsner location and you're meeting with someone with Ochsner, like an Ochsner gastroenterologist, they have the ability to refer to Courtney for a gastrointestinal specific nutrition consult, and it doesn't have to go through your insurance or self-pay.
Nope.
And then if you're outside of the Ochsner network, or if you're not working with a gastroenterologist, I'll also link to our nutrition department at Ochsner Fitness Center because they do take insurance. They do virtual visits. Do you do virtual?
We do.
Yeah. And so that can help it to be even more convenient. And really it comes down to, like we keep saying, kind of, being your own detective, paying attention to it, not just blowing it off, not having that shame make us pretend it doesn't exist. And then really trying to address it and think, what are the things that I'm willing to change? What am I not willing to change? What maybe symptoms or side effects am I willing to put up with or not,
Right.
And it's, working with a dietitian can go like as far down that path as you want to.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Courtney.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
A huge thank you to Courtney for joining us for this episode to talk about this topic and share her expertise. If some of this has resonated with you, we would love to hear it. If there's things that you've experienced or things that have helped you that we didn't touch on, reach out as well. We always want to know what you think. Also, Courtney has agreed to come on with the veterinarian cap that she wore for so many years, and we'll be talking pet nutrition. So if you've got specific questions on that, send those my way in advance and we'll be sure to include them. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you'd like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com. You can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. If you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.
Hello, I'm here during the lunch rush with Janice, who owns her own food truck.
Best cheesesteaks in town.
Janice traded up to Geico Commercial Auto Insurance for her food truck business. We're here where she needs us most.
They sure are.
We make it so easy for her to save, with customised coverage that grows with her business. Sorry, I just get so emotional talking about saving folks money.
Not this onion I'm chopping?
It's just so beautiful. Oh yeah, no, it's the onion.
Get a commercial auto insurance quote today at geico.com and see how much you could save. It feels good to Geico.